This is Miss Humston reporting for Townfield Primary School News. Justin. Year 5, the Kodiak and Koala Bears were able to interview 2 people who lived during World War II. This is a special report.
My dad was called up into the army just before I was born in 1941, so he didn't see me for many years other than in a photograph. I knew I had a dad, but I only saw him from a photo. So 4.5 years later, when I was playing in the street, we did that in those days, I saw this man, a soldier, walking down the street with a kit bag on his shoulder. I didn't know who he was, but he went into our house, so I followed to see who he was. Of course I was told, "This is your daddy." But at first I didn't like him. For me, things changed. All through the war, I had slept in the same bed as my mum. Now I had to sleep with my granny. I didn't like that change at all. It was another 3 years before me and my dad became close. I had 2 brothers, one who was 10 years older than me, so when he was 14 left school to be a telegram boy, delivering good and bad news to people throughout the war. I can remember one day a great big army lorry came to the street with about 12 children on board. Someone came to our house and asked my mum if she would take one of these children. She said yes, and so we had a little boy of about 7 years old, but he wasn't in the house above 4 hours when he disappeared. He had run away. My mum had to report it to the authorities. I never found out what happened to him. Things were very hard going because everything was on ration, so my mum and granny had to make a little go a long way. We didn't get any fruit, only if someone had a plum tree or an apple tree in their garden, and they gave us some. Lots of people used to grow rhubarb. My mum had a friend in Walthamstow near London. She kept a couple of chickens and would send hard-boiled eggs at Easter time. She would boil them in onion skins, which turned the shells brown. It was always wonderful to get this parcel with the eggs in, because it was very hard to get fresh eggs. My mum could only get what they called powdered eggs in a tin. I remember once getting what they called a locust. It was like a dried banana. It was black. It was all right, but anything's better than nothing. Just as the war was finishing, we had gone to school one day, and we were all given a tin of Tom Piper's stewing steak. It had come from Australia. How pleased we all were to be running home with this tin of meat to our mums, who thought it was wonderful. Throughout the war, I learnt to do many things. My granny showed me how to darn socks and how to make a pegged rug made out of sacking. You would get the sacking from bags of potatoes and strips of old cloth that would be cut up into pieces about 3 inches long, and poke the material through a hole we had made in the sacking with a dolly peg, those old-fashioned wooden pegs, which we broke a piece off and sharpened. You could make some good rugs that way. My granny also showed me how to make socks on 4 needles for the soldiers. We didn't get many sweets because they were on ration. So in 1952, when rationing finished, I ran down to the sweet shop and spent all my pennies on sweets. It was lovely.
That was Valerie Howard telling us her experience of what it was like to live as a child in wartime. And now we hear from Jim Howard, who will tell us about his experience as a wartime evacuee.
My memories of being an evacuee. I was born on September the 3rd, 1937, in Isleworth Hospital in Middlesex, which is 9 miles from the centre of London. At that time, we were living in Wembley, which is 10 miles from London. On the 3rd of September 1939, my second birthday, at 11 o'clock in the morning, war was declared on Germany, and at the time I was living in Greenford in Middlesex, which is 11 miles from London. With many bombing raids on London between September the 7th, 1940 and May the 24th, 1941, the Blitz, London being attacked by air raids 71 times over a period of 57 nights. Bombing became by day, night. In the following years, all households were given a Morrison shelter for inside the house and an Anderson shelter for the garden. Bombing was then directed on RAF airfields, and the one closest to our house was RAF Northolt, where Spitfires and Hurricane fighter aircraft were based, which was just 2 miles from our house. Then, in 1944, the V-1 rocket known as the Doodlebug was launched from the French and Dutch coasts. I can remember that in early 1944, one of these V-1 rockets flew over the top of our house while I was in the garden, and the rocket's engine stopped. About 20 seconds later, a loud explosion occurred. Later, I found out that it had landed on the Glaxo Chemical Works just 1 mile away from our house. At this point, it was decided to evacuate myself and my sister, who was 3 years old, away from all the dangers of any further bombing. We travelled to Shrewsbury in Shropshire with our brown labels on our coats, and our gas masks in the brown cardboard box, and a small case with our clothes in. How we got there, I cannot remember, but I think it was by train. When we arrived, I can remember we were all in a big hall with other children and were taken to a big house next to the church called St Chad's by a man and a woman called Mr and Mrs Davies, who were the caretakers for the big house and the church. The experience was strange but exciting, but all the time I was wondering when we would go home again. I went to school a few days later, which I disliked and ran away from after only one morning. I walked home, which was about 1 mile. A new school was found for me, where I remained till returning back to Greenford in 1945.
This was Miss Humston reporting for Townfield Primary School, Birkenhead.